KZ is one of the most searched brands for IEMs in the world. No, seriously, look right here. And as I see it, I understand why people look for them. The KZ Castor Pro Bass Edition is at a good price while looking like a great choice for a starter set at around $25 when not on sale and $13 or 800 pesos when on sale. Now, 25 USD is not cheap and I don't think that it's actually worth buying at that price, but are they worth getting at like $13? Well, that's what I'll tell you right now by going through the product from build onwards to comparisons with similarly priced products that I have in my current collection. But first, I want to establish my preferences, where I like a neutral bright tuning with a slight sub-bass boost, so the tuning on these are quite far from what I like to use on a regular basis, especially with the lack of sub-bass that these have. Volume-wise, I typically use a dongle DAC amp called the Kali JM6 Pro, so I usually have it at around 45% when I'm on my laptop, 13% on Hebe Music, or 50 to 55% indoors when I'm on my phone, and 14% or 50 to 65% like when I'm outdoors. That essentially means that at the 16 to 22 ohm impedance rating that these have, there's no realistic use to use a dedicated dongle DAC amp to get the most out of this set. I'm also punishing myself by using the stock medium ear tips that it comes with. Oh, also, I'd like to ask all of you right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, as we're so close to getting to 1,000 subscribers. But in any case, accessories are some of the most important factors of any product, and it's also one of the most ignored aspects of this hobby, as anyone with a decent chunk of money can make an argument that cables and ear tips are easy to replace, but not everyone has the means to do just that. And with that said, there's no case. The cables are downright shit, and the ear tips are terrible to say the least. Starting with the cable, these are stiff as hell, and the ear hooks are obnoxious, where I can't securely fit this around my ears even if I heat it up then bend them. Matter of fact, they became more loose when I introduced heat to them, as instead of going inwards, they stretch outwards. And if you're planning to change the cables, take note that these use the QDC connectors with 0.75mm pins, so make sure to look for those, as regular 2-pin cables won't connect securely, or they won't connect at all. You also get 3 ear tips that are downright terrible. I'm not gonna lie, they are stiff, and you absolutely need to get a new set if your skin is sensitive, as this is one of the very first times where I felt irritations coming from the ear tips themselves, on top of being uncomfortable in general. Build wise, it weighs in at 9.6 grams per earpiece, so they are heavy, as they use a mix of aluminum and resin for the housing, while being a bit on the taller and wider end at 9.7mm here at the thinnest part at the bottom, and 16.8 millimeters at the widest end relative to the connectors facing the left. This is my left. For the depth, they are at 13.5mm at the tallest point and 13mm at the deepest point, and around 23mm for the height of the entire housing relative to the side, with the connectors facing downwards. Lip size right over here is at 6.35mm in diameter, acoustic chamber is at around 5.78mm in diameter, and the entire acoustic chamber is 5.45mm long. Now, when I compare these to the Legacy 2, which is my standard for what's comfortable, and that's relative to me, they have a thicker taper here at the bottom, which can touch the anti-tragus here, especially if you have a shorter ear. Overall, I find these to be comfortable despite being thick and sticking out of my ears and prone to fingerprints. Oh, and if you're looking for comparisons of housing sizes relative to what I have between the different IEMs that I also have, check the tier list link in the description below. Now, in terms of the sound, I find them to be average across the board, because there's a lot of bass, but the quality and fidelity doesn't come across as clean or anything special. I find it thick and full-bodied, but not heavy or something that I felt while listening to these. They also come off as a bit muddy across all the songs in my test playlist due to how they tuned the lower mids, where turning all the switches down might help a bit, but it generally still sounds muddy and a bit messy. And on the topic of switches, switches 1 and 2 are going to be assigned for the lower frequencies, mostly in the bass and lower mids. Then switches 3 and 4 are for middle and treble frequencies, all of which are finicky to adjust and is something you won't play around with on a usual basis, or at the very least something that you would play around frequently, as they are hard to adjust even with the included tool. They also won't do much if you don't like the default tuning, but then again, Bass. These are for bass lovers. Mids come off as a bit recessed and warmer due to the bass boost, where the vocals in songs like Royals by Lorde, which is a bassy song, it comes off as deeper than compared to something like the Hexa or the Daybreak. In my opinion, it's super uncharacteristic, where it feels like mids are just an afterthought for these in exchange for extra bass and extra treble. And speaking of the upper mids to treble, in songs like Give It To Me by Timbaland and Popular by The Weeknd are borderline shouty, especially at the higher volume. Overall, I'm definitely not the target consumer for these IEMs, as though I want fun, I want to have it without sacrificing a lot of the natural tones and sound of the songs I listen to. And on top of that, I want to be able to like get one thing and just be happy with it for everything, where these aren't going to do that because, well, I like to use IEMs for games like R6 and Valorant, and these tend to muddy up the tone enough to make sound cues imprecise, especially during skirmishes. The technicals also present the same challenges induced by the amount of bass, as the soundstage, like the imaging, speed, separation, and detail retrieval all take a step back in quality in exchange for bass and treble quantity, which is all for the sake of fun and excitement. And if I compare this to something like say the Tangzu Wan'er 2, they're going to be a bit more versatile when it comes to general music listening, as these are going to add bass and treble that will be regarded as good by the general majority. However, neither of the two are going to be good for gaming, but in like a general standpoint, I still think that the Wan'er 2 is going to be the better package just for the accessories alone, where if you don't necessarily like the sound of the Wan'er 2s, you're going to at least get something in return like the cables and ear tips, while if you don't like the Castor Pros, well, you have no choice other than to force yourself to wear and like them or give them away. Now, when compared to something like the Moondrop Chu 2, which are my favorites, the KZs are worse in almost everything except for the nozzle materials, where the only caveat of the Chus is that the nozzles are made out of brass, so it needs extra care and extra attention more than these KZs. Overall, the KZ Castor Pro Bass Edition provides like a lot of fun and excitement, and is something that can be a good entry point to people who aren't like particularly looking for something that's relatively accurate for in-ear monitor standards. I give it a D+ rating, and if you want to know why it got that grade, the grading metrics are at the start of my tier list. Now, if my description appealed to you, make sure to go ahead and use the links I have below to purchase them, as that's the most direct way to help me and the channel without actively paying for anything extra. That's been the KZ Castor Pro Bass Edition. My name is Charles. Please remember to subscribe, and goodbye.